The baton came down on the hood of the Ferrari before the engine was even off. A single strike, deliberate, the crack of steel on carbon fiber echoing down the empty stretch of highway like a verdict. Get out of the car. Get out now. Officer Dale Pruitt's voice carried the particular authority of a man who had never once questioned his own judgment. The man in the Ferrari didn't move immediately, not from fear, from the careful, practiced stillness of someone who understood exactly how the next 60 seconds needed to go. He was 38 years old, black, driving a $340,000 car on an empty stretch of interstate at 11 on a Tuesday night, and he had made this calculation before. His hands went to the steering wheel, visible, deliberate. Then he reached slowly, so slowly, into the inside pocket of his jacket. What he pulled out was not a registration, not an ID. Dale Pruitt's face went the color of old concrete, because the badge in that man's hand didn't belong to the local PD, or the county sheriff, or any department in this state. It belonged to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the case file open on the laptop in the passenger seat had Dale Pruitt's name in it. 8 years earlier, the first time Darnell Cross walked into the FBI field office in Charlotte, North Carolina, he was 29 years old, carrying a master's degree in criminal justice from Georgetown and a chip on his shoulder the size of a structural beam. He'd grown up in Greensboro, the second of 4 kids, raised by a mother who worked 2 nursing shifts back to back, and a father who drove long haul and was home 11 days a month if the route cooperated. They were not poor in the way that word gets weaponized, but they were not comfortable, and comfort, the kind that meant his mother could stop working the overnight and his youngest sister could stop worrying about the scholarship renewal, had been the engine behind every decision Darnell had made since he was 16 years old. He was recruited out of Georgetown by an agent who'd done a guest lecture in his criminal justice seminar and stayed afterward for coffee and said simply, "You should consider federal law enforcement." Darnell had considered it for 4 months, running the calculation from every angle. And what tipped him was not ambition or ideology, but this. The FBI had the reach to do things that local law enforcement couldn't. He had grown up watching local law enforcement, and he had opinions about what it couldn't do. Federal work meant jurisdiction without borders. It meant cases that mattered at a scale that local police work, however excellent, rarely touched. He joined, excelled, made special agent in 6 years, which was not unheard of, but was fast and was attributed by his supervisors to a specific combination of gifts: extraordinary patience, a memory for detail that bordered on unsettling, and an almost clinical ability to stay calm in situations that made other people loud. He drove a 10-year-old Honda Accord for the first 4 years because he was meticulous about money, the way he was meticulous about everything, and because nothing about federal salary suggested Ferrari. And because he was black in the American South, and had learned early that visibility was a variable you managed. You chose when to be seen. You chose the terms. The Ferrari came later. After a case that had taken 27 months to build and resulted in 11 arrests and a federal conviction that made the front page of 3 major newspapers, and after a bonus structure that his financial advisor described as life-changing if you're smart about it, and after a conversation with his father, retired now, the long-haul routes finally behind him, who had said, sitting on the back porch in Greensboro on a Sunday afternoon, "You've been careful your whole life, son. At some point, you're allowed to have something you wanted." It was midnight blue. It was excessive. He'd loved it without apology. He'd driven it twice on that particular stretch of interstate before Tuesday night. He knew the stretch. He knew Dale Pruitt, too, though Pruitt didn't know him. Not yet. The town of Cresswell, North Carolina, was not the kind of place that showed up in FBI case files often. Population, 11,000. 1 main street, a civic pride built on high school football and the annual Peach Festival in August. It was the kind of town that worked, mostly, that had its rhythms and its loyalties and its small, comfortable certainties about how things were ordered. But Crestwell had a problem that had been accumulating for 3 years, quietly, the way structural damage accumulates in a building that looks fine from the outside. A pattern of traffic stops on the interstate that ran past its eastern edge, stops disproportionately concentrated on drivers who matched a particular profile, stops that reliably produced contraband seizures, cash, mostly, under asset forfeiture laws that allowed the department to keep what they took. The numbers, when Darnell's team pulled them, told a story that the individual incidents concealed. A department that had discovered a revenue stream and three officers at the center of it. And at the center of those three, Dale Pruitt. Darnell had been building the case for 19 months. Not rushing. Never rushing. Patience was the skill that separated the cases that stuck from the cases that fell apart in front of a federal judge. He had records. He had testimony from two former officers who had left the department and, once promised protection, had become extraordinarily forthcoming. He had financial records showing Pruitt's personal accounts growing at a rate that bore no relationship to his department salary. He had 6 months of monitored communications. He had, sitting on a laptop in the passenger seat of the midnight blue Ferrari, a case file that was essentially complete. What he had not planned was to be on that stretch of interstate on a Tuesday night in a car that Dale Pruitt apparently found objectionable. He'd driven down from Charlotte to review a piece of physical evidence at the county courthouse, something that needed to be done in person. Couldn't wait. The kind of procedural task that investigative work was full of. He'd taken the Ferrari because it was the car he'd driven to Charlotte, and he saw no reason to switch. He was heading back at 11 p.m. because he'd worked until 10 and then had dinner, and now he was on an empty interstate doing 72 in a 70 zone when the lights came up behind him. He had clocked Pruitt's patrol car idling in the median 3 miles back. He'd noted the car. He'd noted the make and the plate number because that was the kind of noticing he could not turn off, and because this particular make and plate number had appeared in his case file more than 40 times. He did not speed up. He did not slow down. The lights came on anyway. Darnell pulled over with the precision of a man who had been trained in exactly what this moment required. Hazards on. Engine idling. Hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, visible in the lights of the patrol car behind him. He watched Pruitt in the side mirror. The approach was not cautious. It was aggressive in the way of a man who had made this stop 100 times and had never once been wrong about how it would go. The baton strike came before Pruitt even reached the window, not at the glass, at the hood. Deliberate. A dominance display, the kind of damage that said, I am in control here, and the evidence of it is now scratched into your property. $11,000 of damage, the insurance adjuster would later estimate. One swing. Get out of the car. Get out now. Hands where I can see them. Darnell sat very still, the laptop on the passenger seat, with its case file and its 40-plus references to this man's patrol car in the stretch of road, was closed. Good. He had about 45 seconds to manage the situation before it became something that would require institutional response. An institutional response, even when it was warranted, even when it was necessary, had a way of making complicated things more complicated. He opened the door, slowly, stood up, kept his hands visible. He was 6 feet even, broad-shouldered, dressed in the dark slacks and button-down of a man who'd had a long day in a courthouse, and the first thing Dale Pruitt said when he saw him was the word printed in the title of this story. Darnell heard it the way he'd heard that word before, fully, physically, in the chest, and then redirected. He had work to do. Officer, he said, voice level, I'm going to reach into my jacket for identification. Slowly. I want to be very clear about what I'm doing before I do it. Pruitt had his hand on his holster, standard posture for a man who had decided what this was. Do it slow, he said. Darnell reached into the inside pocket of his jacket with 2 fingers, the way he'd been trained, the way he'd done it in situations that were considerably more dangerous than a highway stop in eastern North Carolina. He produced the badge case, opened it, held it up in the lights of the patrol car where Pruitt could read it without ambiguity. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Darnell counted. Dale Pruitt's hand came off the holster. His face did the thing that faces do when a structure collapses. Not all at once, but in sequence, the supports giving way in the order that load-bearing elements fail. The certainty first, then the authority. Then, working its way up from somewhere below the professional training, the first cold understanding of what he had just done, and to whom he had just done it. He started. Don't, Darnell said, still calm, still level. The Ferrari behind him had a dent in the hood, and $11,000 of damage, and the scratch would need to be repaired, and he would deal with that later, and none of it mattered right now. What mattered right now was the next sentence out of his mouth, which he had the right to deliver however he chose. He chose carefully. My name is Special Agent Darnell Cross, FBI Field Office, Charlotte. You are Officer Dale Pruitt, badge number 1147, Cresswell PD. You've been on this stretch of interstate since 9:15 this evening. This is your third stop tonight. I know this because I've been watching this stretch of road and your activity on it for 19 months. He paused. Let that land. The damage to my vehicle was witnessed, is on your dash cam, and will be documented. I need you to step back to your vehicle, and I need you to call your watch commander. Right now, Pruitt didn't move for a moment. A man standing in the crosshairs of a reckoning he'd been building toward for 3 years finally arrived, looking nothing like he'd imagined it. He'd imagined, if he'd imagined anything, a raid. Floodlights. A swarm of agents. Not a single man in a midnight blue Ferrari on an empty interstate. Calm as still water, with 19 months of his life in a laptop case on the passenger seat. Step back to your vehicle, officer, Darnell said. Please. Pruitt stepped back. The watch commander arrived 20 minutes later, the shift supervisor 12 minutes after that. Darnell made 3 phone calls while he waited, to his case supervisor in Charlotte, to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and, briefly, to his father in Greensboro, who picked up on the second ring and listened to 30 seconds of summary, and said, "You okay?" And Darnell said, "Yes." And his father said, "All right then," and hung up because that was how they talked, and because it was enough. By 1 in the morning, there were 6 vehicles on that stretch of highway, and the conversation had moved from a traffic stop to something with entirely different stakes. The case file on Darnell's laptop, which he'd been planning to finalize over the next 2 weeks, was already complete enough to move. His supervisor made that call at 2 a.m. The warrant applications were filed before sunrise. Dale Pruitt was placed on administrative leave by 7 the following morning. He was arrested on federal charges, civil rights violations, conspiracy, and wire fraud. 11 days later, the trial was not quick. Federal cases rarely are. But it was thorough because Darnell Cross built thorough cases, and the evidence was what it was. 19 months of documented stops, seized assets that never reached the evidence log, financial records that told a story in numbers, and the testimony of 2 former officers who described, calmly and in detail, how the operation had worked and who had run it. 2 other Cresswell officers were charged alongside Pruitt. A 4th cooperated with the prosecution and testified. Dale Pruitt was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 7 years federal prison. The asset forfeiture funds recovered, a portion of what had been taken over 3 years from drivers on that stretch of road, were placed in a restitution fund administered by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Not everyone who'd had money taken could be identified. Some could. Those people got letters. Darnell sat in the gallery on the day of sentencing, not in an official capacity. He'd finished his role in the case months earlier. He was there the way you attend the conclusion of something you've spent 2 years of your life building, not for celebration, but for completion. He watched Pruitt hear the sentence without visible reaction, which told him something about the man. And he watched the families of 2 of the defendants who had not been Pruitt, younger officers, men who'd followed a lead they should have refused. And he felt the weight of the thing in a way he let himself feel and did not process into anything smaller than it was. Justice was not simple. It never was. But it had happened. On this case, on this day, it had happened. A year after the conviction, on a Sunday afternoon in Greensboro, Darnell Cross sat on his father's back porch with a glass of sweet tea and the Sunday paper and the kind of quiet that accumulates in the places that shaped you. His father was in the garden, doing the thing he'd always done on Sundays, moving among the tomato plants with the focused patience of a man who understood that growing things required attention and time and couldn't be rushed. His mother had finally stopped working the overnight. His youngest sister had finished her degree. The things that had driven him were still with him, but they had changed shape, from urgency to something steadier, the engine running smooth rather than hot. The Ferrari was in the driveway, repaired, the dent long gone, the hood restored to the mirror finish it had started with. He'd had a conversation with himself about that, whether to keep it, whether a car that carried that particular memory was worth keeping. He decided it was, not to prove anything, because it was his, and it was excellent, and his father had been right. You were allowed to have something you wanted. He thought sometimes about that Tuesday night on the interstate. about the 4 seconds of silence after he'd held up the badge, about the way Dale Pruitt's face had moved through its sequence of collapse, about the word that had been said and the baton mark that had cost $11,000 to fix, and the 19 months of patient work that had turned a traffic stop into the end of something that needed to end. He didn't tell the story often, not because it was private exactly, but because the version that got told in the retelling, the moment of reversal, the badge, the silence, felt incomplete without the 19 months before it. Without the 2 former officers who'd been afraid and then weren't, without the financial records and the warrant applications in the trial, without the families of drivers who'd had money taken from them and who had in some cases gotten letters of restitution from a federal office that didn't usually write those kinds of letters, the moment only meant something because of the work. The work only meant something because it finished. His father came back from the garden with 2 tomatoes in his hand, the good ones, the ones he always picked on Sundays, and set one on the porch railing next to Darnell's glass. "Still thinking about it?" his father said. The old man had the gift of knowing what you were thinking without being told. Sometimes, Darnell said, his father sat down in his chair, picked up his own glass, looked out at the garden for a while. "You built the right thing," he said. "Then you held it until it mattered. That's all you can do." Darnell picked up the tomato. It was warm from the sun. "Yeah," he said. "I know." The Sunday afternoon settled around them. Garden, sweet tea, the sound of a quiet neighborhood going about its rest. And Darnell Cross let it be what it was. Enough. More than enough. Everything.